It's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you all about a topic that's really important to me. So I was talking recently with a CDO of a major US manufacturer that was new to his role, and as he was getting started, the CMO came to him and asked for a pretty simple question. How many pre-orders do we have of product XYZ? So he said, great, we'll get that to you right away. Went to his team, and 3 months later, he had an answer. And the first 2 months, we're just trying to figure out who has the data? What data do we have? Can we get this? Can we get access to it? So as companies move faster and faster, and we want to do more with our digital estates, we see that being able to answer these questions relies on good data practices and good data democratization. And when we talk about data-driven transformations, we can see the benefits. They're pretty obvious. Harvard Business Review said, looking at data-driven transformations compared to their non-data-driven counterparts, you see a 54% increase in revenue and profits, a 62% increase in customer satisfaction, and they were able to do it a lot faster with 44% faster time to market. So we see the benefits that data-driven transformations can give us. And when we look at transformations holistically, we know that transformation is a team sport. It is not just a C-suite activity where we can demand, hey everyone, we're transforming, and then they go back to talk about new business. No, this requires every level of the organization to look at every business process, every metric, everything we're doing, to really drive that transformation and help us accelerate and move faster. And in order to do this, you really need that level of communication. And when you think about it in the modern world, in large organizations, or organizations of all sizes actually, data is the most scalable form of communication, where we can start to say, here are the metrics, here's what I can show, and so on. Now, you've heard that data is the new oil, data is the new gold, data is the new, I don't know, mayonnaise. But I like data is oxygen, especially when it comes to digital transformation. Now, I think it was Wendy Turner-Williams, the CTO at Tableau, that said this. And really, when you think about data as the oxygen, I think that really holds up. And I don't think it's the new oxygen. I think it always has been the oxygen. We're just getting more of it now when we start that. So data and technology have become almost synonymous, right? Where when you think about data, you think about databases, lakehouses, and so on. But they're not synonymous. Data existed before written language. You can see cuneiform tablets that look like Excel spreadsheets. And Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web, said that data is a precious thing and will last longer than the systems themselves. And so it's important as we start thinking through our digital transformation to think about data as the oxygen for this. We need to make sure that data gets to the right people in the organization to answer the questions that they want to. And unfortunately, that's not the reality today for many organizations. They're simply, people don't have access to the data. Or, as I read in one article recently, they're estimating only 16% of employees have access to the data they need to make the right decisions. And ultimately, what we are trying to do is drive data into our organizations. The goal is not a great data strategy. The goal is a great business strategy infused with data. And in order to do that, and that team support, we need to drive that into our organizations. But unfortunately, that's not where many of us are today. Right now, we struggle sometimes to answer the basic questions. I was told that when the Microsoft team went to Satya to talk about doing our own data strategy implementation, he said, I have 3 main questions. What data do we have? Where is it? And who's looking after it? And many of us can't answer those questions today, especially even the first one. What data do I have? The data I have, is it trustworthy? Has it been changed? Do I have shadow ETL going on somewhere. I talked to one organization as they started to modernize their data pipelines. They went through and found a SQL query that someone was converting country A to country B, hard-coded in the SQL, and no one knew why. It had probably existed that way for 10 years, and no one knew. And I would love to say that this is unique, that was at one company, it was a one-off, but no, I think we would all agree that this is happening somewhere in our organizations, either at an Excel spreadsheet level or a report level. There's some level of shadow ETL that's going on. And then again, really looking at, do the people that need access to the data have access to the data? And on the flip side, do people that should not have access to the data have access to it? I think it was Gartner that estimated 70% of employees had access to a data set they should not have access to. And that's terrifying, especially if I can't answer the question, what data I have, I certainly can't answer the question, what data do they have access to they shouldn't have access to? So now I would love to say that Microsoft had this figured out decades ago. We were way better than this, but that's not the case at all. As recent as 2019, we had no data strategy. And we grew up like many of other organizations. We had organically evolved data silos. We had tens of IT teams building point solutions for hundreds of different business units and business users. They were pulling the same data from the same data sets. They were changing it in different ways. They were talking to each other sometimes and not talking to each other other times. There was many, many inefficiencies as you look at this. Data copies, redundant infrastructure, and so on. And as a result, there was increased data exposure risks. So every data copy you have, justified or not, is another point for a data exposure risk. And so we said, all right, we're going to start tackling this. Let's first start with the why. Why do we care? Why are we going after this particular problem? And for us, we came up with the 3 values that you see. We wanted to accelerate data value creation. We wanted to responsibly democratize the data. And then we wanted to unify the data. And we wanted to support this team sport nature of digital and data transformation. Now, I'll call out unifying the data. This did not mean throw everything into one monolithic data lake and let it go from there. No, this is more about being able to know where is the data and how do people get access to it. Let's shorten that 2-month window to find the data and get access to it to days. So we're a technology company. We said, great, here are our goals. We know what we need to do. This is a technology problem. We'll be done in no time. Except as you probably already have read to the end of the story, that's not what we found. This is not a technology problem. Not at all. Well, I guess maybe a little bit, but close enough to say not at all. MIT Technical Review said this is 92% culture, people, and process when you start looking at this. Only 8% is the technology, and that 8% is the easiest part of all of this. And so our first learning along this journey was this is a people and a cultural change management problem more than a technology problem. So let's start looking at, as we went through this, the different things we learned, first about the culture, and then where we landed on the technology side. So the first thing for us to get everyone aligned on is that data is a strategic asset. It's really easy to say. Everyone knows how important data is. And so by saying that, first off, it's the data. It is not the system. It's not the right database technology. It's really about the data. And then the next big piece of this was that data is a strategic corporate asset. There's something about data that hits us at like this emotional, visceral level. This is my data, you stay out of my sandbox, I don't want to share it, you're doing it wrong, I don't like this metric, you're doing that wrong. And so we needed teams to understand that the data that you've collected, even though you collected it, you chose what data was there, you've been seeing this for 10, 20 years. That's not your data. That's Microsoft's data. It doesn't matter if Sally has a SQL server sitting under her desk. That's Microsoft's SQL server, not Sally's. And so that was the first cultural changes, just to get people to see it at that level. And when we talk about data literacy, I think that's kind of the underlying piece of data literacy. Step number one, get people to see how important the data are and that it's not yours, it's ours. So the next thing that we learned was that because we have this this emotional, visceral connection with our data, it led to some tension. So an instance of that is we had a customer 360 team where our central data office said, hey, we're standing up the customer domain. We'd like you to be included and help us out. And the customer experience team said, no. So why not? Because if the central data team does it, it's going to be centralized. Okay, how many copies of customer do you want here? Well, just one, obviously. Why would we have more? Okay, so how does you owning it make it any less centralized than the central data office owning it? So that started to kind of raise okay, maybe you have a good point. And then we focused on the value outcomes that we were going for. If we can get everyone in the organization to align on these shared value outcomes. So we started to have the conversation with them on, okay, in order to own this domain and set it up, you're going to need the right skills, the data engineering talent, all of the different pieces you need for this. And our data office started to work with them, and they came to the conclusion that, you know what? This customer experience team has all of those things, so they will own this domain. And so it's important as you start looking at this that the shared value outcomes applies also to the central data office or to IT, that we really need to understand and look at these outcomes more than what are the organizational, what is that going to look like? It's what are we driving to? One of my peers likes to say, we need to be disciplined at the core and flexible at the edges. We need to have very clear on what we're doing, our processes, our security standpoint, the requirements. In this instance, to own a domain, you need to have, say, these 4 things that you're able to do. And then flexible in each implementation to say, where does it make most sense in the organization? The next learning we had is to align on a team sport operating model. Again, learning from experience with the customer experience team, we really wanted to look at how do we take this team sport operating model and make sure everyone understands it. Now, at the Gartner Data and AI Summit about a month ago, Gartner suggested setting up data franchises in every organization every business unit in your organization. And I like that analogy, that we need to set up these franchises. But again, I think we need to be flexible at these edges. A franchise office is not going to look the same in every single organization. Say, perhaps finance has all of the right talent to own entirely, so we let finance own it, and we go from there. But maybe sales needs a bit more support with data engineers or data scientists, and we can provide that support as well. Now, when we look at this team sport operating model, let's look at the elements of the modern data stack, where we have our operational databases, our analytics layer, machine learning and AI, and then our intelligent applications that's infusing back, and overall, data governance woven throughout. So directionally, when we look at this, we say each domain team will be responsible for the operational databases, the BI and ML layer, and the intelligent applications. And our data office will create an analytics foundation. That looks like the platform, defined infrastructure, maybe shared infrastructure, the policies and standards and so on. And then when it comes to data governance, It's a joint effort here. The domain teams are going to own the data. They need to have that domain expertise in order to really own that data set and those data products. But our central data office needs to own the data governance program as a whole, understanding where are the data, here's the catalog we're all using. Because if we let each business unit pick their own version of a catalog, we don't really have a catalog. Then we're gonna need a catalog of catalogs. And so let's look at what this might look like in practice. As I mentioned before, individual domain teams, as we start to build this out, they may need data engineers and data scientists and ML engineers. And we can have those, the central data office may have these reporting up to the central data office, but being assigned to specific domains. Or maybe a particular domain team has what they need, but they need a little bit of support. Again, disciplined at the core and flexible at the edges. So for our central data office, that interaction I mentioned with the customer experience team was one of the first ways that we started to realize that we want to democratize data responsibly, but not as a center of excellence. We want to be a center of enablement. Seems like a minor shift, but this is really, we don't have to centralize everything. This doesn't have to be the team. It doesn't have to go through one of our data engineers to be written into the data lake. Instead, we want to set, here are the platforms. Look at things like inner sourcing between our teams, and how can we help the teams learn from each other, really enabling the business to move faster and seeing ourselves as such. Some even call these, each individual person, a champion of enablement in this organization. I think that's also a really good way to start looking at this. And when it comes to that visceral understanding of data, this can help overcome that as well. Even that mindset shift in our individual analysts and engineers to say, we're a center of enablement. We're not here to take over, we're here to help you move faster. Now on the domain team side, one of the learnings we had to help them with is that you are going to make the biggest impact to the company by doing responsible domain transformations. So what does that mean? Instead of investing and selecting the best MLOps platform, aren't you going to be much better served creating new algorithms and taking what the central data office has offered you? Instead of issuing an RFP for the best BI tool and selecting that based on your unique needs, are you going to be better served by delivering the reports you have with the technology you have available? Now, that's not to say that you can never select other tools. Instead, it's about being mindful and responsible about it. So, when you are responsibly doing this domain transformation, you do things like you care if you're unnecessarily duplicating the data. Now, as a data scientist, I will be the first to admit, I really didn't care. If I needed data, I was duplicating it and get out of my way. But this is another part of the learning, is start to help people understand, here's the why we don't want to duplicate data unnecessarily. You should care if you are spinning up new infrastructure. Sometimes that will absolutely be necessary, but I would argue most of the times it's not. And so where can you provide the most value out of the data? It's really in applying the tools you have instead of selecting and building new tools. The next one we learned is that it's important to focus on iterative value creation, or as I like to call it, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You want to have progress over perfection. And so when we started, about 20% of the team said, we're not working with you. Heck no, go away. And about 20% of the team said, thank you, or finally someone's here to help us. and about 60% were somewhere in the middle. So we started with the teams that said, thank you for being here. We didn't worry about the other teams. We'll get to them later. But let's start driving value now with the people that want to work with us. Let's take those wins and publish them out. Let's show the organization where we're going. And so now we're at probably about 60% or 80% of the organization is all in. Let's move forward. And there's still about 20% holdouts, more on the fence than anything else. And it's interesting, those 20% holdouts did not all come from the 20% naysayers. Some of those naysayers became champions. But by focusing on iterating through that value, we were able to start moving. Because if you're anything like me, if we wait and we try to find the perfect technology and get everyone in the organization aligned that this is what we're doing, we will never get started. We will be talking about this in 2100. And our competitors will be light years ahead of us. The other important thing here is accept that you may not make the best decision today. You might not pick the best operating model out of the gates, and you might need to tweak. You might not pick the best technology, and you might need to tweak as you move forward. Cicero said, more is lost by indecision than wrong decision. And indecision is the thief of opportunity. So as we're trying to move faster here, we have to be willing to accept that we're doing what we think is right now. Yes, we have to be thinking through what are the other ways, where else is this going to be used, and trying to make a decision that is beyond the use case we're talking about, but we don't want to fall into analysis paralysis. Next, we had months-long debates over data mesh versus data lakehouse versus data fabric versus data hub. And the truth is that these are not mutually exclusive. As my peer Carthel likes to say, these are collectively transformative. And so it's about looking at these modern data architectures and finding what works best for us. We don't need to be purists in the implementation of whatever it is. We don't need to be monolithic in our implementation of this. There may be domains where one of these seems to work better or the other seems to work better, and we have to be flexible with that. And so it's important to, again, understand that these modern data architectures are not mutually exclusive, and we need to make iterative progression and be able to, we might need to change this going forward, but this is what we think right now. Not to mention the fact that in about 3 years, there's going to be some new architecture that's better than anything before. And so if we're always waiting for the best thing, we may as well just stop waiting and do nothing. So here's the architecture, or I would say more of a marketecture of what we came up with for us. So we have a data lake, and on top of that is an open standards-based lakehouse foundation. So we wanted open standards, and we choose Delta format. And the reason we did that is because we want each domain team to be able to choose the compute that they need, but in order to do that, we need a standards-based way of writing and accessing the data. And so we have our lakehouse foundation, and then each of the domain teams can stamp out infrastructure specifically for them. Now, they might not dump everything into the exact same lakehouse. They might build their own data lakes. But it's about being careful and intentional about, are we creating our own data lake, or are we leveraging the enterprise one? And let's understand the differences and why we would need to do that. And in order to do this, we've created some views for our central data office. So this is an example of what the view would look like, where we can start to see the number of data entities by domain, the volume of data that we have. Now, in the upper right, you can hear it says 10.5 petabytes. Actually, Microsoft's active data estate is around 14 to 15 petabytes as we've gone through this transformation. Before this, the actively accessed data estate was about 1 petabyte. And so through this, we've grown this. We can see domains. Where is the hottest domains? Who's pulling the data from there, and so on. We also have a data health scorecard that we can look through at the central data office and also provide to the different domain leaders. Now, this is looking at things like, is your data discoverable? Is the metadata complete? Do you have data lineage enabled? One of my personal favorites, because it's a personal pet peeve, is around access policy. I hate it when I submit a request for anything and someone just lets it die on the vine and I don't hear back. And it may be a month or two. And so here we have this access policy number, and this is not about accept or deny. We don't care in terms of this metric which you do. We just care you do it in a certain time frame so that we can prevent people waiting around for 2 months to find out that you won't give them access to the data they need. And so this health scorecard is reviewed on a regular basis with all the domain leaders. And the goal is we want to obviously make this and improve this. But again, discipline at the core, flexible at the edges. If the leader says, I get it, but I don't have the capacity to deal with that this quarter, we say, that's fine. Like, we're not forcing you to do this whenever. We know there are other business priorities. We just need to keep looking at this. So our results as of this year, so they've kind of been before this year, but right now, through this, we have saved about $20 million a year in redundant infrastructure. We have over 25 enterprise-level data products. Now, each of the domain teams will have their own data products, but we have over 25 that are now surfaced at the enterprise level. And we have a 60% reduction in data copies. Now, I need to clarify that. Someone asked me a question once, like, well, if you don't know where your data is, how do you know how many data copies you've reduced? Okay, good point. We have a 60% reduction in known data copies. But we're actively scanning our environments to look for other data copies. And we have a consistent and scalable data management and governance foundation that we can continue to move forward with. Now, we've taken these learnings through our own implementation and helped inform the products we create. So we have the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, which is about providing a unified platform from operational databases through analytics to data governance. So you can take your data, analyze it as you need, but also you don't have to pay the integration tax. We're really working to reduce, making sure everything's working together and moving forward. And we integrate that into our broader Microsoft cloud of Dynamics 365, Microsoft Office 365, and so on. So all of these can then work together. And as we've built out this intelligent data platform, we've found great partners that we work with in what we call the Intelligent Data Platform ecosystem, including our friends here at Delphix, where we can integrate easily into this entire platform, again, reducing the integration tax that you need to pay in order to get these solutions to work together. So as you go forward, you need to look at your data capabilities in terms of your technology, but more importantly, what is your data culture? And finding those two together really will find your unique potential with your data and being able to drive this forward. And so hopefully some of the lessons that I've shared today can maybe short-circuit some of your own learning, but the goal is, at the end of the day, you want to leverage your data to move your business faster and faster and get those data-driven transformation benefits that we talked about. Thank you very much.